Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Peter Skopek. I'm the director at WISPIRG, the Wisconsin Public Interest Research Group. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We work closely with the Sierra Club and with lots of other really great coalition partners on transportation and public transit issues in Wisconsin. And so I'm excited to talk a little bit about transit in the context of the coronavirus pandemic and share a couple things that I've come across that I found interesting in that context. I think the first thing I'd say is that as with lots of other areas of our society and our economy, the pandemic is, I think, highlighting and exacerbating a lot of the inequities and the divisions that we see in our society. That same thing is true for the transportation sector as well. So first, I think the pandemic is showing how important it is that you're able to own and drive a car in the United States. That's unfortunately a feature of our transportation system. We have a really highly car-centric transportation system in the United States, and that's definitely something that's highlighted by the coronavirus pandemic. One of the things I noticed that I thought was interesting is that Seattle has been at the forefront of doing COVID-19 testing, so administering coronavirus tests to people who think they might have been exposed to the virus. And they've been doing that by offering drive-through testing for coronavirus. But what do you do if you can't actually drive, if you can't get yourself to a parking lot where one of those testing tents is set up? So there's been an effort in Seattle, for example, by transit advocates, by disability rights advocates, to make testing more easily accessible for people who are in a wheelchair, for people who don't have access to a car, who can't drive to some of these testing sites. That's certainly been an uphill fight for folks there. Similarly, we just celebrated Easter in Wisconsin. Many people in Wisconsin just celebrated Easter. I think some of you may have seen that there were drive-in Easter services in some communities. So, for example, Stoughton offered, some churches in Stoughton offered drive-in Easter services. It's great that that happened, and that some of those churches found ways for people to gather, but obviously, that's pretty emblematic too of how it takes a car often to participate in community life in the United States. Some of those churches also use Facebook Live, but obviously driving to a church to participate in a service is something that's often required of us on Sundays, even when we're not in a global health crisis. So that's the first thing. I think this pandemic is showing that it's really important to own and have access to a car in the United States. That's exacerbated by the pandemic. The other aspect that I found interesting here is that this crisis at the moment is really showing how our public transportation systems are really critically important to a lot of people and to our society. But we really struggle to meet a lot of people's transportation needs with those public transportation systems, even in the best of times. I think a lot of it happens because we don't appropriately value the critical role that public transportation systems play in our communities and in our societies. Obviously, a lot of people who are essential employees, what we now consider essential employees, so folks who work in the healthcare field, who work at grocery stores, who work in manufacturing, rely on public transportation to get to those essential jobs. They rely on public transportation to get them there, not only now that we're in this global health crisis, but even during the best of times, right? And that's something that should be obvious all the time, is that we need public transportation for a lot of people to be able to participate in our economy, and we're not doing a good enough job at providing that access to folks. And I think one last thing that I want to emphasize before we go on to Ray is that in that context, I think we measure the effectiveness of our public transportation systems in ways that are really inadequate in many ways, right? I think in many ways we measure whether or not a public transportation system is functioning well by how many riders there are in that public transportation system. I think a lot of us in the advocacy that we've done have heard people who are skeptical of public transportation say, there's an empty bus rolling down the highway. Why are we funding empty buses that are just transporting a few people? We really shouldn't be funding that type of transportation. It's not a good use of our tax dollars. So the argument is that if buses aren't packed to the gills all the time, then it's really not worth the investment. It's not worth the public investment. What we're seeing right now, though, and what we really should be seeing all the time, is that those buses now they are empty because we have social distancing requirements in place. Those buses are taking workers who are doing really critical work and people who are getting to the places that they have to go, even in this crisis, to those places. And so we really should be thinking about transit and the effectiveness of transit and the importance of transit in terms of what is that public service bringing to our communities? What does it do for our quality of life, for our economy, for getting people to the places that they have to go? Not only now, when we see that it's critically important for people to get to hospitals, to manufacturing, to grocery stores, but every single day, because that's what public transportation does for us every single day. So I think at that point, I just want to express my thanks to all of the transit systems, to the transit system staff, to the operators who are doing incredibly important work every day, but especially right now to connect people to the places that they have to go. They're putting themselves at often great risk. They're frontline workers in this crisis as well. So I just want to say thank you and express my gratitude. And maybe this is a good place to turn it over to Ray to talk about Get On Board Day.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I'm Ray Grosh, and with the Sierra Club's State Transportation Group, but I also work in southeastern Wisconsin here, and I'm in Waukesha County with our Sophia group, and on the regional basis in southeastern Wisconsin, with doing some work with the Regional Transportation Leadership Group. And here in Waukesha, well, in southeastern Wisconsin, we were looking for something to do for the bus system. Get On Board Day is tomorrow, and obviously with the pandemic, nobody's real excited about going out and riding on the bus. We're all kind of sitting tight at home. But what could we do? Although there are a lot of people who are actually riding the bus, who are working during this time, critical for our critical infrastructure and food supply and all of those items. So what could we do? And actually the Regional Leadership Council, Transportation Leadership Council, actually started a GoFundMe site to raise money to buy gift cards for all of the bus drivers, kind of a show of appreciation for all those working during this pandemic. And we're trying to publicize that. I wish I was a little bit better at getting online and getting things, but I were thinking we're going to send out notices to all the radio stations and try to go to a lot of the radio stations and things like that tonight and tomorrow to get that notice out and maybe direct people to that GoFundMe site for the Leadership Council. So we have had a few donations on there so far. They're hoping to raise at least $15,000. And somehow we'd like to maybe even encourage some of the bus riders who are getting free transportation. The bus system is actually providing in Waukesha and Milwaukee and Racine are providing free transportation. So if the riders want to leave a tip, if you will, for the driver, that would help our effort, and that's how we can promote appreciation for the and raise awareness of what's going on with the transportation system. So that's what we're up to right now. I think there have been some efforts also to for people to get the face masks, make a face masks available to the drivers who don't all have them. I think obviously the transportation systems are trying to provide distancing measures to keep the drivers and the passengers at least 6 feet apart in most instances. So that's what we're up to in southeastern Wisconsin.
Great, thank you, Ray.
Local perspective, Ray. From the statewide perspective, I just wanted to add Sierra Club has a couple additional ways that you can get involved in Get On Board Day. And the coalition that Peter is part of with us as well is working together. We have a couple of specific asks. One is to make masks, as Ray mentioned. We have a sign-up form on our website if you want to volunteer to sew masks for transit drivers who are on the front line. Additionally, we're asking people to, if you live on a bus line, to chalk a thank you message near a bus stop, or put a sign in your yard thanking transit riders so they can, or transit drivers, so they can see that as they drive past. Expressing gratitude to those frontline workers. And then additionally, we are encouraging people to send thanks, whether that's a handwritten letter or an email or a social media post with hashtag Get On Board, thanking your local transit system and all of the staff that work there, whether they're driving buses or specialized transportation and paratransit. Just expressing gratitude for those really essential.
Great. Well, thanks again, Cassie and Ray, for all the great work that you're doing, and thanks for having me again. Just wanted to summarize one more time what we've talked about today. So, again, I think the pandemic that we're in right now is really exacerbating a lot of the inequalities and the challenges that our transportation system faces, not only now at this time of crisis, but really every day. I think this should be an opportunity for us to really evaluate how critically important public transportation is to a lot of our communities, to a lot of people in our communities, to what we consider essential services in healthcare, in the food supply, and in manufacturing, and lots of other places. And we should appreciate transit for really what it does for our communities. And that also means appreciating the transit operators and the transit systems. So Get On Board Day is a really great opportunity for how best to do that. Sierra Club has some really excellent resources for folks to get involved with Get On Board Day. So definitely check those out. Thank your transit riders. Make a contribution to the Regional Transit Leadership Council to support the gift card donation program that's going on there. Make a face mask, send a thank you message to your transit operators and your transit systems, and show your appreciation for the really critically important work that these systems are doing for our communities.